All right. Hey guys. So excited to be tuning in on today's live. Not going to waste time. We're going to jump right in. If you are looking at the title, we're going to be talking about why relocating is the best move for you to have career growth. If you're joining in for the first time, hey, nice to see you. If you are tuning in and this is your second or third time, hey, welcome back. Definitely drop in the comments where you're watching in from, and also drop in the comments if you've ever relocated for a job and how that situation turned out for you and if you felt it really progressed your career forward. I'm seeing some comments. Hey Joe, yeah, I'm doing something a little bit different with the hair, having it out and stuff. But I want to share my own story about how I relocated. At this point in my life, I've relocated twice. The first time in 2011, where I moved to Dallas, Texas. Actually, Joe on the live here, she was my roommate for one time while we were in Dallas together. And then most recently, the second time, I actually just relocated to Miami, Florida. So I can say I have a bit of experience when it comes to relocating for a job and really thinking about, okay, what are the moving pieces I need to consider, not only for the job itself, but also situating myself in a new city. And so back in 2011, I got the opportunity to join an analyst program with a company I was already working for. So this was my second position out of college. My first position was I was working in retail banking, and anyone who's ever been a teller or a personal banker can tell you that it is really gritty in the retail banking side. So I knew for me, I personally didn't have any career growth. I didn't have aspirations to stay in retail banking. So when this analyst program arose for me to go into underwriting, I just kind of hopped at it. And so within this analyst program, they actually gave us the opportunity to pick which city we would relocate to. And I believe the options were Jacksonville, Florida. I was like, I ain't going there. Phoenix, Arizona. I was like, I'm definitely not going there. Columbus, Ohio. I was like, I'm not going there. I could have stayed in New York, but then they also offered Dallas, Texas. And so for me, when I chose Dallas, Texas, I'll be honest, I knew no one in Texas, okay? And as a Haitian American, as a Caribbean, I don't think any of us know anybody in Texas. And so for me saying, okay, I'm going to pick up and leave and go to Texas, my family wasn't exactly very comfortable with that idea because I didn't necessarily have a support system. But I knew that this was something that would really grow my career. And how I looked at it was that it was a 2-year commitment. If after the 2 years it didn't work out for me, I could always pack up and move back home. Because at that point, the farthest I've ever been from New York, and I'm born and raised in New York. I had moved to Dallas for a short period of time because I went to school there. I went to College Park, and so that's the furthest. It was 4 hours away. So for me to pack up my stuff, hop on a plane, I think it's like what, a 3-4 hour plane ride into a new city I've never been to. It was honestly really, really hard for me. But the preparation for it, honestly, I had that down packed. And so I'm actually reading some of the comments. Joe said, yes, I relocated for a job. We know how that turned out. FYI, Joanne, who was my roommate, she hated living in Dallas. We had this running joke that living in Dallas was like our season of wilderness, okay? Because God really pruned us, okay? He really, really like made sure that we were ready for this next level. And then she also said, I tried to be her friend, but she wasn't with it. Okay. I wasn't the most friendliest in the beginning of my career or moving to Dallas. And that's something that I actually want to talk about is that when you're considering moving and you're trying to build that network, it gets really difficult because you realize, wow, I really have to start over with a new friend group, start over with a new support system. So I wasn't exactly the most welcoming when it came to new friendships. But now, as I'm in my 30s and I'm in the second city, oh, that's something I could do like that. And so going back to the story, I decided to pick Dallas. And then while I was preparing to go to Dallas, I did a few things. And so the first thing was that I just researched the city. And at that point, it was really just Google and Facebook. So I researched. I saw that Dallas was an up and coming city. One thing that I also researched was what was the income tax there, because being a resident of New York, I was subject to federal taxes and state income taxes. And so seeing that when I moved to Texas, there was no state income tax, it was a win for me, because this move from New York to Dallas would increase my salary by about $10,000. And so with no state income tax, I had way more money, and plus a decreased cost of living. I had way more money to support myself than I would having to try and go out on my own living in New York. And so the move to Dallas just made sense to me. It was cheaper to live there. I had more money in my bank account. I would have a new experience where I'd be able to learn new skills in underwriting and finance and be exposed to a different side of the bank. And so when I lived in Dallas, what was supposed to only be a 2-year commitment turned into almost 6, 7 years when I was actually laid off from my job. And so actually I see a couple comments here. Catherine, hey, watching in from Bowie. She said, it's easier when you are single and you have no kids. I'm no longer willing to do it without a major life upgrade. Would love to hear a fresh perspective. Okay, well, we will talk about that. And Jacques says, how do you overcome the moving woes, especially with no support system? Actually, I can answer that question now. So moving for me the first time was initially the move and like leaving there. I honestly, I look at it, it was pretty much like a movie. It was so dramatic. And I realize now it really didn't have to be that dramatic. Like you start having your going away dinners, and everybody's waving you goodbye. And I just remember touching down at the airport in Dallas, and I didn't realize it would affect me that much, but I immediately began to cry, right? Because I was in this new city. I had all my luggage. I had to figure out how I was going to get to my new apartment. My car hadn't even been shipped yet. And so here I am and Joanne actually met me at the airport. Here I am, just me and Joanne. I've only known her for maybe 6 weeks from our training. But other than that, I don't really know her like that. I'm like, wow, like I really uprooted myself from a place I've always called home, you know? And so I come from a very tight knit family, very tight knit community. I was always with my friends, and to not have that anymore, like in theory, I thought I could do it, but to actually walk it out was harder than I thought. And so one of the first things for me was I'm very big on my faith. I'm a Christian and a believer, was getting locked in to a church community. Right. And so that for me was the best way for me to also feel a sense of home, as well as continue on with like just being plugged into the word of God and that being my comfort. The second thing is that I just started to just go out a bit, right? So of course you go to your company happy hours and do those things, but also just venturing into like just different things. So taking on new hobbies, new arts and crafts, new restaurants. There were times I would just drive around just different neighborhoods. Because for me, it's like exploring new things also let me know what was possible for me. Yes, I mean, I say this like being a New Yorker, we always think that New York is the best, and I'm going to live by that. New York is the best. But there are different experiences outside of New York that I had yet to see. And so being able to move to Dallas and experience some of those things that I might not have experienced had I stayed in New York allowed me to kind of like push the boundaries on or push the boundaries about what was available for me in the world. And so I think moving really does a good job of forcing you to face the things that normally you would just brush off, right? Because when you're in your comfort, when you're in your environment, you don't think too much about your thoughts. You don't think too much about, okay, this is what I'm going to do with my day, because it's pretty systematic. You have your routine, but when you move off and do something new, you start to become very intentional about your time, very intentional about your money. But that was another thing. I moved, I was on my own, so I had to financially sustain myself because there was no more calling my mom and my dad for $30. Like, nah, you have to pay your rent on your own and figure that out. Oh, your car's not working, figure that out. You know, your lights got cut off, figure that out, you know? So it definitely kicked me into overdrive of just adulthood in general, because had I moved down the street or maybe the town over from where I'm from back in New York, like, I don't think I ever would have took seriously how I never would have took adulthood as seriously as I did had I not moved away, you know? And so I think that it definitely increases your tenacity and your resilience when you move away. And that in turn, I realized forced me to even get better at my job. Because for me, I just felt like, okay, if I moved away for this specific purpose to get better at my career, to be intentional about growing my skills and experiences, like I'm going to squeeze this experience for until every last drop is out of this sponge, you know? So when I showed up to work, I showed up on time, I showed up focused, you know, and when there were opportunities, like I took them as much as I could. And I also realized that that time period started to really develop the work ethic that I have now, you know, and it also showed me, okay, isn't exactly what I want to do with the rest of my life. You know, like it was cool to have this job, have this experience in my 20s, but now I want more for myself as I move into like my 30s and then eventually my 40s, and, you know, so on. Right. So, I'm in Dallas and things are going, I can say that when I was living in Dallas, things were going okay. Right. Like I had just enough money. I was traveling a little bit. I felt a bit more settled. You know, things at my job were pretty predictable. And then, at the end of 2016, 2017, I got the notice that I was being laid off from my job. And you can imagine not only the shock of being laid off, but also like, oh crap, like I am miles, thousands of miles away from my family and I am laid off from my job. What am I about to do? Okay. And for those of you that are dealing with a layoff right now, like I just want you to know that you don't have to go into immediate problem solving mode just because you got laid off yesterday. You don't need to find a job today. Like you actually need to sit in what you've experienced, because if you try to brush past it, I realize a lot of us are just compacting trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, that when something else happens, this is all going to spill over. And so I also looked at my layoff as a career reset, because I just got honest with myself. Like, I moved out here for this job, but I'm not even in love with it, right? Like, yes, I had freedom and flexibility and I could do this, that, and the third, but this is not where I see my life going for the rest of my life, you know? And so I took this time with this layoff to say to myself, okay, what do I actually want to do with my career? How do I see myself growing, not only as a professional, but how do I see myself growing as a woman? Because I think that even for me, like I think that a lot from what's missing in career development is that we only focus on getting the job. But one thing that I'm very intentional about with the branded career is that we focus on the person. Like, what do you want to do not only with your career, but with your life, right? Does that involve getting married and having kids? Do you want to pay off debt? Do you want to move? Do you maybe want to downsize? Like, lifestyle is so important when you're thinking about career growth. And I think that for me, I knew that Dallas wasn't necessarily home. And that's another thing. Like, you can move, but I think intrinsically you know when you're supposed to settle down in a place. Like, I got to Dallas and I thought it was, you know, honestly, on paper, it was the best place to buy a house, raise kids, have a family, and all of those things. But I didn't necessarily feel like it was the place for me, at least long term, you know? So I made the ultimate decision to move back home, restructure my life, restructure my career. And that's where I was able to, one, transition industries. I currently work in the commercial real estate industry. And then two, also start my business, The Branded Career, which is a coaching and consulting agency helping mid and senior level women move into more executive level leadership. And so another thing that was birthed out of that unemployment is my book called The Unemployment Guide: How a Setback Can Launch Your Career. And I always encourage people to read this book if they're going through a season of unemployment, if they're going through a season of uncertainty and they're trying to figure it out. And with this book, I really do, I really walk you through my story, which starts being laid off in Dallas up until things that I did in order to transition my career and pivot and break into a new industry. And so I come back home. I'm literally in my parents' basement and I'm like, all right, I'm starting over. And starting over doesn't mean that you're starting over from the bottom, but starting over from the perspective of I'm starting from experience, right? Because the experiences, the job experiences, and even the life experiences that I took with me or I learned in Dallas, like I take with me to this day. And I think if anything, someone asks, where can you find the book? You can find the book on my website, thebrandedcareer.com, on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, and it might actually be at Target online. But you can find them at any major retailer. The unemployment guide. So when I'm back at home and I'm thinking about, okay, what I want to do next, I knew I wanted to pivot into commercial real estate. And so I actually took a position that paid me less because I said to myself, you know what? I need the experience. Like there's but so much transferable skills you can have. There's but so much finagling that you can do in an interview, but you actually have to be honest with yourself about where are your gaps and where are you lacking. And I knew I didn't have that specific experience. And so I took a pay cut. I took a pay cut into a senior analyst position. And that was the best move I could have ever made for my career. And the reason, because one, it brought me into an environment where my sole job was to learn. And because I was already a working professional, I already had work experience, I just started getting promoted very quickly at this point. And so with that promotion, or multiple promotions at this point, most recent being early last year, I got the opportunity to move again. And so my company actually opened up an office in Miami during the pandemic. And during the pandemic, like most of you all, I was tired of being caught up in the house. I was tired of just being stuck doing, I used to call them prison workouts, but I used to be in my backyard just doing my little workouts, trying to get it in. And it's cold and it's dreary in New York. Like I was just over it during the pandemic. And so when they opened an office in Miami for me, I decided, you know what? I think moving to Miami might be a good move. And at that point, I've never thought about moving to Florida. Like no shots against Florida, but I just never thought I could see myself living in Florida. And so I talked to my boss and I said, you know what, would there be any issues with me moving to Florida, moving to Miami? And he said, I don't think so. And that for me, I took a step back because there's so much red tape around just any types of decisions at my company that it was so easy, kind of took me back. And so he comes back, he says, everything's a go. Just give us a date about when you want to move. And so at that point, I had told him in April. By July, I had came out here to find an apartment and do all of those things. And then by October, I was living in Miami. And so I've been living in Miami for about a year and a half at this point, and I absolutely love it. Okay. I think the culture down here is definitely what I needed for where I am in my career. Another thing that I realized is that, especially when you work for a multi-state type of company, or even a multinational company, that yes, you have an overall overarching corporate culture, but each office has its own individual culture. And being down here in the Miami office has definitely helped me grow, be a better leader, be a better real estate professional, just because I have so much access to a lot of senior and executive leadership that I would not have necessarily had I stayed in New York. And so that's a little bit about just where I am in my career and what I've been able to do with moving twice, once in Dallas and another in right now in Miami. And like, I just highly encourage it. And so just getting back before I go into points about just tips for relocation, someone had a question about easier, okay, or comment. It's easier to do it when you're single and have no kids. One, I absolutely agree with that. So one thing I encourage those that are earlier in their career or just don't have those constraints, like like absolutely leave and experience a different city. And so another thing is that even as I become older, I'm just a little more risk averse. Like, would I think about doing another major move like this in another year or two? Probably not, because it does take a lot of money. It takes a lot of energy in order to pick up and move. But if you're thinking, if early in your career, like, you know what, something's not right, the environment I'm just not growing in, just go and leave. Like, find a job or find a company that's willing to relocate you, or even just start applying to positions that are outside of the state. Another thing that I would definitely encourage in this point, especially because remote work is so accepted at this point, remote work and work from home and all of that. Like, if you have a remote job, don't be afraid to just work that job from a different state. Like, I think that people don't understand how much of a perspective change living in a different city, living with different people in a different environment has on the way that you view life, has on the way that you view work. One thing that's a huge difference for me is the fact that when I was in New York, it was like grind all day, grind all night. Got to, yeah, like there was constantly this thing of having to prove myself, show accomplishments, and all of these things. I'm down here in Miami, and everybody's chilling for the most part. Like, people are established already. People are definitely, I can say, about their business, but the environment is just so different. And for me, at this point in my life, that's exactly what I wanted. And so, Catherine also said, I'm no longer willing to do it without a major life upgrade. Okay, so here was the thing. Before I decided to move to Miami, I already had an itch that I wanted to move to a different city when I was back in New York. For me, my choices at that time were DC, and I was looking at Chicago and maybe LA. And so the thing about DC, Chicago, and LA, they all relatively had the same cost of living as living in New York. And so for me, mentally, I was making way more money at that point from when I was a senior analyst and took that pay cut. But I just said to myself, you know what, the money, I don't want it to be the thing that holds me back. So DC, I was already familiar with, and I knew that that could be the place that I settled into because all of my friends were there. I was very used to the DMV area, but it still kind of felt like I'm not sure. Chicago, I thought it was a great city, but I was like, if I already don't like New York cold, I'm probably not going to like Chicago cold. And then when I was looking into LA, I have some family there, and it had the weather that I wanted. But when I looked at what I would get for my money, I'm like, I'm going to be living basically in the back of somebody's garage for this amount of rent. So I don't necessarily know if this is going to be the upgrade that I needed. And so when I decided to take that day trip to Miami to kind of figure out if this is the place that I wanted to be, I started to create a list of just my criteria of what I wanted my apartment to look like, where I wanted to live. And I think that the city just checked off all the boxes. And I think that when you're starting to look at like how much money you're going to make, because here's another thing, living in Florida, there's no state income tax. So that's more money that I'm seeing in my pocket. So when I was thinking about cost of living and just my lifestyle, I felt that moving to Miami gave me those things. So like, I have an apartment. At one point, I did have a view, but they're blocking my view right now with the new high rise. Um, but I had the view. I have, a beautiful apartment, the gym, all of those things, the conveniences. And so for me, it just felt like it felt like it matched this next level or this current level in my life that I wanted to live. And so I think that if you're starting to like actually think about in your mind, what does this next level look like? I think a lot of cities will start to align with, what it is that you're looking for. And so Jacques says, what differentiates the move from Dallas to Miami? Ooh, okay. So I would absolutely say the move to Dallas was based on survival mode, and the move to Miami was really based on a place where I was actually thriving in my career. And so when I moved to Dallas, I think, yes, a lot of it was professional. A lot of it was, okay, I needed to grow, I needed to be better, and all of those things. But a lot of it was like I was young. I also felt just misunderstood in the environment that I was in. And I just felt like I just needed to get out. And I felt like I'm just going to take this job. I'm going to move. I'm going to make it the best situation for me, as best as I can. And it was so much like when I was living in Dallas, like I joked about in the beginning of it. My roommate was on here from Dallas. that we called it the wilderness. Like I felt like I was constantly like, that movie Bird Box? Like I was constantly moving through Dallas like this, like just trying to figure out my way, trying to figure out what makes me happy, trying to figure out what I wanted out of relationships and life and my career. Dallas was also the place where I tell a story about how at one point I felt like getting an MBA was the only way for me to accelerate my career. And I'm talking about, I think 6 to 8 times I took the GMAT, 3 times I took the GRE, failed them all. And I know you can't fail at a standardized test. I failed them. Trust me, because the admissions officers would look at my score and they'd be like, "Ooh, girl, okay." um, I spent thousands on trying to get my MBA. I spent thousands on applications and traveling and all of these things, right? So Dallas for me was a place where I was constantly trying to survive, constantly trying to prove myself. And so now my move to Miami, there was just so much ease in that. Like I think my move to Miami, I always say it was a God thing. Like I didn't place Miami on in my list. Like God placed that in me. And so the ease of getting the yes from my boss, the ease of getting my apartment when it was honestly 100% occupied. Like when I showed up to my apartment, they said, "Oh, we don't have any apartments available." I leave, I come back. I just wanted to be put on the little wait list. And then they're like, "Actually, someone just broke their lease. Do you want their apartment?" Like, that's all God. The fact that my apartment is what, maybe 5 or 10 minutes from my current office, the same commute I had back in New York, or even the fact that when I look at my apartment being on the 8th floor, and biblically the number 8 is the number of new beginnings. Like all of that is just a God move for me. And so I just believe that, when you're moving, every move is not going to be your happy ending, but I believe that every move will build to your happy ending. And so that's just my background. Someone says, Professor X says, sometimes kids might change your perspective and prompt you to move. Yeah, so I actually have seen some people who do have kids and do have a family and say, you know what? Living in New York ain't right for me. I need to pack up and leave to give my family a better position, whether that be moving to the South, or maybe that might be moving to, an equally expensive city, but maybe you have more of a support system there. And so I think that if you're moving, you should at least keep the option of a move there for you, because I believe that there's always a way for you to make things work. And so here are a few tips that I have when it comes to relocating and just trying to figure out if this next move in a new city would be right for you. And so the first thing you want to do is research your city. So like I did with Dallas, I was using Google and Facebook. But with Miami, I actually relied more on YouTube videos. I relied on IG and TikTok. I think all of these things are great resources when it comes from getting the perspective of people that are currently in a move, trying to move, or live in the city, so that you can kind of get a vibe and a feel of where you're going to or potentially might be moving to. The second thing, and this is super important, is that you're going to need to create a budget, but you're going to need to create two budgets. The first thing is that you want to create an actual budget, a budget for moving. So that includes, do you need a U-Haul? How much that is going to cost? Shipping your car, shipping your expenses. Another thing when it comes to moving, you want to think about your deposit for your apartment. You also want to think about any other moving expenses. I'm drawing a blank as it relates to your deposit. Oh, your application fees, administration fees, because applying for an apartment is very expensive. Okay, so making sure that you have enough money in order to even get to the apartment that you want. Another thing for planning for your move is budgeting for the actual trip when it comes to like doing the scouting. So I budgeted money for spending a weekend in Miami. So that included my plane ticket, my rental car, restaurants, and all of those things, because I knew that it was going to be an investment in order for me to move to Miami. The second thing is that the second budget you want to create is budgeting for your potential living expenses. And so a tool that I've used in Dallas still works to this day. It's called www.paycheckcity.com. Hey guys, hey, paycheckcity.com. The reason why I love this resource is because you're actually able to create to get okay, so you're actually able to put in the numbers that you need in order to see what your paycheck would look like in the applicable state. So you would go to the website, you would select New York, you would select Miami, you would select Texas, and so it would calculate whether or not you had state income taxes. It calculates your social security, your federal income tax. You can put in the amount of dependents, and it will give you your net pay based on the pay frequency. So you can also put in semi-monthly, bi-weekly, and all of those things. And what's great about that is that you're budgeting based off your potential net income. Okay, that's what you need to see. So you're able to say, okay, I'm going to be taking home net 7,500 a month. This is what my budget is going to be for my potential rent, utilities, car, gas, all of those things. And you can say to yourself whether or not this move actually makes sense. Another reason why I like to use that tool is so that if you need to negotiate, you're able to negotiate from a place of facts and not feelings. The third thing, make sure you visit before you move. I think that if I would have done anything differently with my move to Dallas, I would have actually tried to visit multiple times, but I was only able to do it once. It was a once and done. I found my apartment and I was out of there. And so when you visit the city, you don't obviously want to just visit your apartment, but actually drive around the neighborhood. Drive around the neighborhood, not only when you're visiting during the day, drive around while at night because it'll make a world of difference. You want to time your commute from your apartment to your office building if you're going to be commuting into the office. You also want to drive around and see where are the grocery stores, where's the gas station, where's the local mall, where's the hospital. Like you want to drive around so you get a feel for where your new home is going to be. The next thing, number four, is that you want to utilize your network. And so in Dallas, I'll be honest, I was early in my career, so I didn't have much of a network. My network was my coworkers. And so with my coworkers, remember when I talked about like building connections, I relied on my coworkers to tell me, okay, where should I go to eat here? What churches should I visit, right? And so now that I'm down in Miami, I have a bigger network. And so I'm able to rely on my professional networks, not only just my coworkers. I'm able to rely on family of friends who are able to guide me and direct me. And so you want to utilize them when it comes to even when you're starting to think of, okay, who's going to be my immediate emergency contact. Utilize your network for that. The next thing is ask for help. My move to Dallas, I did that completely on my own. One coworker actually helped me in finding an apartment with his aunt who happened to be a realtor, and she drove me around. And then my move but other than that, I moved myself there. I figured it out. I paid for everything, and I just showed up to Dallas. When it came to Miami, I had one of my best friends actually come down with me during my visit so that we can look at apartments. And my niece came down with me, made a little family thing, and look at apartments and see where were the apartments that actually checked off the boxes for me. Also, when it came for asking for help, my dad actually helped me move from New York to Miami, stayed with me for about a week. And that really helped as far as like just setting up my apartment, but also just adjusting to the city this first week and feeling like I had home with me here down in Miami. And then the last thing is give yourself time to adjust. I think adjusting to Miami was just really easy for me this second time around, especially because of where I am in my life. One of the things about just living in Miami, I think is just easy, is that because it's such a touristy city, I never felt like I was by myself just because everybody was down here to visit me. I still like to say that I'm kind of like the Airbnb down here in Miami. But Dallas was really, really different because no one goes to say, oh, we out in Dallas, I'm going to Dallas. Like, no, like people aren't going to Dallas to vacation. So people that came to visit me in Dallas, it was very intentional, but it was very far and few in between. And so it was really hard in those first few years because I felt like I didn't have my friends that were coming to visit me. But also putting context in there is that when you're in your early 20s, like people barely had money to travel, you know? And so me living out in Dallas, like that was my choice. And so I couldn't expect that there was going to be a line of people coming to visit me every other week or every other month. And so it really was a season for me where I learned how to be by myself. That's one thing that I'm truly grateful for. Like, I learned how to truly enjoy my own company. The other thing is that living out in Dallas taught me was to strike up conversations with strangers and how to build connections with people that you don't know. So I learned how to ask better questions. I learned how to be a better listener. And also because I had just a bigger perspective, like, I just realized I was way less judgmental and didn't bring my arrogant New York attitude to every conversation. And so that was one of the things that really helped me. As far as like giving yourself time to adjust, um, it can get very lonely, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't talk about when moving. Like, yes, we might seem like we have a new fun and we're so adventurous and we're risk takers, but it gets extremely lonely. But the loneliness is, it one, it's normal, but then two, it's okay, right? You don't necessarily have to fill your time with stuff, right? I think the loneliness gives us time to be way more introspective. It gives us time to really question and say, okay, is this how I really want to live my life? And I should also say, like, is this how God wants me to live my life? And I don't think that I would have had that quiet season had I stayed back in New York. And so, with giving yourself time to adjust, of course, you want to continue to do the things that make you happy. So if that's going to the gym or trying new restaurants and all of those things, maybe deciding that you want to start dating, go ahead and do that, but don't feel like you have to have it all together as soon as you touch down and as soon as you unpack. Like, allow it to be an adventure, allow it to grow you, and allow it to be a chapter that you'll be able to give someone else advice in the future. So that is all that I have for you all today. If you have some more questions, go ahead and drop them in the comment box. Oh, before I forget, we do have the Accelerate Your Masterclass, How to Master the Promotion Process in 2023. That is happening May 25th May 25th. It's a Thursday at 7:30 p.m. We are going to be covering mistakes that people make when they're searching for a job, how to turn a job that you hate into a promotion, the number one mistake that people make when negotiating their salary, and also how to use your voice to create a personal brand that attracts the right opportunities for you. So once again, that's happening May 25th. Accelerate Your Masterclass. If you're thinking about moving, Accelerate Your Masterclass is the webinar that you want to be a part of, because you'll be able to answer some questions that might assist you in this next move in your career and in your life. So with that, you all, I really had a good time. See you on the next live.